It's the largest UN presence in Gaza, with 13,000 personnel and 300 premises. The agency is critical for supporting a shattered population and the ceasefire. And yet, in 2 days, our operation in the occupied Palestinian territory will be crippled as the legislation passed by the Israeli Knesset takes effect. At stake is the fate of millions of Palestinians, the ceasefire, and the prospect for a political solution that brings lasting peace and security. Mr. President, in the wake of the ceasefire, we must contend with the devastation of the last 15 months and the enormity of the challenges ahead. A peer-reviewed study of deaths by traumatic injury in Gaza reveals that the mortality figures provided by the Ministry of Health is a minimum estimate. 46,000 deaths is likely an undercount by more than 40%. The study also confirms that the majority of those killed are women, children, and the elderly. Those who escaped death by bombardment, starvation, and disease have emerged shell-shocked. Tens of thousands of people are now returning to the decimated north to search for the living and to bury the dead. Across the Gaza Strip, Palestinians are turning to UNRWA, the agencies they have known all their lives, for support. Curtailing our operation now, outside the political process, and when trust in the international community is so low, will undermine the ceasefire. It will sabotage Gaza's recovery and political transition. Members of the Council, full implementation of the Knesset legislation will be disastrous. In Gaza, undermining UNRWA's operation will compromise the international humanitarian response. It will degrade the capacity of the United Nations just when humanitarian assistance must be scaled up significantly. This will only worsen the already catastrophic living condition of millions of Palestinians. The government of Israel claims that UNRWA services can be transferred to other entities. In fact, the agency's mandate to provide public-like services to an entire population is unique. Our capacity to directly provide primary health care for millions of Palestinians and to resume education for hundreds of thousands of children far exceeds that of any other entity. These services can only be transferred to a functioning state. The government of Israel claims that UNRWA plays a negligible role in providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. In fact, UNRWA constitutes half the emergency response, with all other entities delivering the other half. Since October 2023, we have delivered 2/3 of all food assistance, provided shelter to over 1 million displaced persons, and vaccinated 250,000 of children against polio. Since the ceasefire began, UNRWA has brought in 60% of the food entering Gaza, reaching more than 500,000 people. We conduct some 17,000 medical consultations every day. Less quantifiable, but critical for the humanitarian response and the ceasefire, is the community acceptance. Palestinians know and trust UNRWA. For them, UNRWA is the doctors and nurses providing health care, the aid workers distributing food, and the mechanics and engineers building and repairing wells for clean drinking water. The agency's mere presence brings stability amid profound uncertainty. In the occupied West Bank, where violence is surging, ending UNRWA's operation will deprive Palestinian refugees of education and health care. The Palestinian Authority has made clear that it does not have the financial resource or capacity to compensate for the loss of UNRWA services. In occupied East Jerusalem, the government of Israel has ordered UNRWA to vacate its premises and cease operations by Thursday. This will affect approximately 70,000 patients and more than 1,000 students. The deputy mayor has called for a public celebration of UNRWA's expulsion from East Jerusalem, opposite the headquarters of our West Bank field office in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. It is on this land that local authorities are planning to build illegal settlements. The relentless assault on UNRWA is harming the lives and future of Palestinians across the occupied Palestinian territory. It is eroding the trust in the international community, jeopardizing prospects for peace and security. Mr. President, the Knesset legislation defies resolution of this Council and the General Assembly. It flouts the ruling of the International Court of Justice. It disregards that UNRWA is a mechanism established by the General Assembly to provide assistance to Palestinian refugees pending a political answer to the question of Palestine. Implementing the legislations makes a mockery of international law and imposes massive constraints on UNRWA's operation. We are determined, however, to stay and deliver until it is no longer possible to do so. This is not without risk for our Palestinian colleagues, who face an exceptionally hostile operating environment fostered in part by a fierce disinformation campaign. Member of the Council, the government of Israel is investing significant resources to portray the agency as a terrorist organization and our staff as terrorist or terrorist sympathizer. Billboards and ads accusing UNRWA of terrorism recently appeared in major cities around the world. They were paid for by the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Google ad campaigns redirect those seeking information about the agency to websites replete with disinformation. The absurdity of anti-UNRWA propaganda does not diminish the threat it poses to our staff, especially those in the occupied West Bank and in Gaza, where 273 of our colleagues have been killed. It sets a precedent for governments to accuse a United Nations entity of terrorism as a pretext to clamp down on human rights. It sets a precedent for criminalizing humanitarian assistance and protection. This year, propaganda efforts spearheaded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry received a boost of $150 million. The political attacks on the agency are motivated by the desire to strip Palestinians of their refugee status, thereby unilaterally changing the long-established parameter for a political solution. The objective is to deny Palestinian refugees the right to self-determination and erase their history and identity. But let me be clear. The right of Palestinian refugees to protection and assistance are not derived from UNRWA's mandate. They exist independently of the agency. And if UNRWA ceases to protect and assist Palestinian refugees, their rights will not only remain, but there will be much greater emphasis on the right to return or to be resettled, for which UNRWA has no mandate. Mr. President, a ceasefire in Gaza must be followed by a political transition that includes an orderly conclusion of UNRWA's mandates and the handover of its public-like services to empowered and prepared Palestinian institutions. This is a path now pursued by the Global Alliance for the Implementation of the Two-State Solution, led by Saudi Arabia, the European Union, and the League of Arab States. Only a political pathway of this nature can ensure the protection and welfare of Palestinian refugees and peace and security in the region and beyond. A clear choice lies before us. We can allow UNRWA to implode due to the Knesset legislation and the suspension of fundings by key donors. The repercussions of this implosion will not be confined to national borders and will only further destabilize the region. Alternatively, we can allow the agency to progressively conclude its mandate within the framework of a political process. UNRWA was always meant to be temporary. A fair and lasting political solution would allow the agency to hand over its services and workforce to a Palestinian administration. UNRWA has much to offer in support of a political solution. The agency is the largest provider of primary health care in Gaza and the second largest in the West Bank. Our health services and expertise are integral to building a strong national health system. UNRWA has also a pivotal role to play in education. In Gaza today, 650,000 girls and boys are living in the rubble, learning nothing more than how to survive. They have already lost more than 2 years of learning. Absent a full-fledged state, only UNRWA has the capacity to bring these children back to learning. So great is the enthusiasm for resuming learning in Gaza that more than 260,000 children, half of them girls, enrolled in our online learning platform this month. If we fail to resume education in Gaza and to preserve it in the occupied West Bank, we will sacrifice an entire generation of Palestinian children. Member of the Council, the threat posed by political effort to dismantle UNRWA is compounded by financial challenges, with key donors deciding to end or reduce their contribution to the agency. I'm appealing for an urgent increase in financial support to UNRWA, the early disbursement of allocated funds, and a review of funding currently on hold. I also take this opportunity to underscore the agency's long-standing commitment to neutrality. A detailed presentation at UNRWA's Advisory Commission meeting last November made clear that our high-level action plan to implement the recommendation of the Colonna report is on track. We will also continue to take all necessary steps to investigate credible allegations made against the agency and its personnel. Mr. President, Member of the Council, implementing the Knesset legislation will heighten instability and deepen despair in the occupied Palestinian territory at a critical moment. I'm seeking your decisive intervention in support of peace and stability in the occupied Palestinian territory and the broader region. First, push back against the implementation of the Knesset legislation. UNRWA's personnel and services are integral to the success of the ceasefire. Second, insist on a genuine political path forward that delineates UNRWA's role as a provider of education and healthcare. The agency is essential for ensuring a viable political transition. Finally, ensure that the financial crisis does not abruptly end UNRWA's life-saving work. The agency cannot continue to operate in the face of extraordinary challenges without adequate resources. In closing, I would like to share with you a message received from a young person in Gaza last week. It is a stark reminder of the heavy responsibility we bear. Quote, "I'm writing to you from the rubble of a home that once was a place of warmth and life. Now, my days are spent searching for the most basic necessities like flour to feed my family. What truly breaks me is my helplessness in the face of children. Their innocent eyes seek safety I cannot provide, an answer I do not have. Around us, the elderly sit in silence, their hearts weighed down by decades of loss and suffering. And here I am, dying 1,000 times every day as I think of all that I cannot do for them." Unquote. Unlike the author of this message, we are in a position to do something. It only requires your decisive action and leadership. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Lazzarini for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Jan Egeland. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President, honored members of the Security Council. I speak as a lifelong friend of Israel and the Palestinians, and as one who has repeatedly called out the atrocities and war crimes committed by all sides, including on the 7th of October in and against Israel. And as you may know, I led the Norwegian facilitation of the Oslo Accords in 1993 and have worked on the Palestinian-Israel peace process ever since. I worked closely with Yitzhak Rabin, Shimon Peres, and Yasser Arafat at the time. Let me here first reiterate something that all European, American, and local humanitarian organizations on the ground in Gaza agree on ever since some donor states started to defund UNRWA. UNRWA plays an indispensable humanitarian role in Gaza and in the West Bank, and it cannot be replaced by any other of us, the humanitarian organizations on the ground. We all rely on UNRWA's logistical capacity. We operate in UNRWA schools. The people we support are attended to in UNRWA health clinics. And as Philippe Lazzarini just detailed, the organization has and still is responsible for a massive relief operation in the hour of greatest need for the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. There are, of course, important recommendations in the Colonna report that the organization is and must be implementing. But again, you need to know that we, and most importantly, the Palestinians, simply cannot do without UNRWA. Based on reports from my colleagues on the ground and my own two latest visits in recent months, I will share with you some hard facts about our realities on the ground. First, the positive news. The ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has at long last allowed some hostages and a number of detainees to finally be reunited with their families. And it has introduced a welcome halt in the hostilities in Gaza. Starting yesterday, we have seen how tens of thousands of civilians finally could make their way back to their homes in Gaza's north. But when I visited Gaza City in December, I was shocked by the destruction that these people will find in the north as they come home. It will be a race against the clock to give families the emergency shelter, the water, the sanitation, and the other basic relief, followed by the recovery and rehabilitation of civilian infrastructure from homes to electricity and sewage systems across Gaza, and in particular in the north. We also need to ensure that people can move freely from south to north and north to south also in the future. Of the more than 46,000 people killed, with thousands still under the rubble, half are women and children, all are innocent. More than 1,000 health workers have been killed, alongside more than 350 aid workers. The vast majority were colleagues from UNRWA. And the Security Council must understand that 66% of all structures in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed, according to the United Nations' own satellite center analysis of very high resolution satellite imagery. 80% of commercial facilities are damaged or destroyed, 68% of the road network. And this includes the damage or destruction of 87% of the homes in Gaza since the Israeli assault began. When I last traveled to Gaza in December, I drove for hours across the Strip only to see destruction and devastation. I could not believe the Second World War-like once urban wastelands that Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and other cities have become. It is, to me, similar to the destruction of Syria's besieged cities like Eastern Ghouta, Aleppo, and Homs during the war waged by the Assad regime. Also there, vast urban areas were destroyed by indiscriminate warfare as the people were besieged and starved. I was then the UN Special Advisor for Humanitarian Diplomacy in Syria, and I was then glad to see the near unanimous condemnation of the abuse of international humanitarian law. According to the Shelter Cluster for Gaza, which NRC leads, 1.3 million people now need emergency shelter support and basic household items. A UN damage assessment released this month showed that clearing over 50 million tons of rubble left in the aftermath of the bombardment could take 21 years and cost at least $1.2 billion. For 2 decades, children will have nowhere to play due to the rubble and the debris and the countless unexploded bombs. The universally agreed principles in international law of proportionality, distinction, and military necessity have been thoroughly violated. Against this backdrop, the humanitarian groups on the ground are desperately trying to scale up our assistance after having been severely impeded throughout the conflict. My organization, the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is active in several sectors, including shelter, water and sanitation, education and legal aid, we managed finally to have 18 trucks of humanitarian cargo enter Gaza last week after months of frustrated attempts. We are these days working to deliver an additional 4,500 pallets of essential supplies. But looting and attacks on aid convoys remain a major concern, particularly in high-risk zones such as the stretch between the Kerem Shalom border crossing and the Shukat Asufi junction. On the 22nd of January, a significant looting incident took place again and disrupted aid efforts when a criminal group hijacked 7 aid trucks near Kerem Shalom, injuring one driver during their abduction. The following day, clashes in the area forced the cancellation of a planned UN and non-governmental organization rotation out of Gaza. Later the same day, an NRC convoy delivering trucks to our warehouse was nearly looted just meters from our premises. Swift action from the police ensured that trucks were secured with minimal losses. Humanitarian organizations also continue to face a number of bureaucratic and administrative challenges of bureaucratic nature, and it includes the systematic denial of visa and the renewal of work permits by Israel. On the 12th of September of last year, the Israeli National Security Council admitted to the Knesset that Israel was no longer issuing visas to employees of international humanitarian non-governmental organizations. And this appears to be part of a broader effort to undermine humanitarian work in the occupied Palestinian territory and limit assistance to the Palestinian population. But as the occupying power, Israel is legally obliged to facilitate humanitarian operations in Gaza and in the West Bank alike. So, Mr. President, Security Council members, in the short term, to address the urgent humanitarian needs and ensure an effective response in Gaza, we need the following. Number one, full and unrestricted access and the ability to move people and supplies, including fuel, freely from north to south and vice versa. Secondly, we need security and protection for aid operations. Authorities must implement robust security arrangements to protect humanitarian aid operations from looting and violence. And humanitarian organizations must be allowed to collect aid from Gaza's crossings using sealed and secured transportation options, such as box trucks, as the open trucks we are forced to use are routinely looted. Measures must be taken to guarantee the safety of aid workers with clear commitments from the parties to the ceasefire agreement to respect humanitarian operations and our personnel. And thirdly, we need strengthened coordination and oversight messages. The UN must ensure more effective action-oriented coordination mechanisms to streamline aid delivery and avoid duplication of efforts. Increased international oversight is required to secure continued access over border crossings and to monitor compliance with international law. When one party, Israel, controls all aid to civilians on the other side without international monitors, we again repeatedly risk politically motivated closures. All parties to the ceasefire must be held accountable for their commitments, with clear and transparent communication on the progress of humanitarian access and reconstruction efforts. And fourthly, we need financial and operational support urgently to scale up the humanitarian response. Immediate, flexible, and sustained funding is critical to meet the immense humanitarian and recovery needs and to scale up our response in Gaza. Israeli authorities must enable the safe and predictable flow of cash into Gaza so that humanitarian organizations can implement cash assistance programs, pay staff salaries, and procure essential goods and services. Only 2 Bank of Palestine branches are expected to reopen, with still no clear security framework for cash injection or circulation. While all of this is happening in Gaza, we are also alarmed by the surge in violence across the occupied West Bank. Israeli military operations and settler attacks have intensified, leading to widespread insecurity, displacement, and severe restrictions on Palestinian freedom of movement. The Israeli military operation Iron Wall and Jenin refugee camp, launched on the 21st of January, has already caused severe humanitarian consequences. And we are already witnessing similar patterns of disproportionate use of force in the West Bank as we saw in Gaza before the ceasefire. So, in conclusion, the current and much needed ceasefire in Gaza is, of course, extremely fragile, as it is welcome. And as negotiators engage in discussions on the following phases of the agreement, the international community must continue to put pressure on both Israeli and Palestinian decision makers. We also need stronger, more united, coherent, and more assertive pressure for peace, for compromise, and negotiated progress from the international and regional powers. Given the fragile nature of the Gaza ceasefire and the potential for more violence in the West Bank, the Security Council, in accordance with your mandate, should put all of your energies into achieving a peaceful resolution to the question of Palestine in line with international law. The UN General Assembly has scheduled key international mechanisms to address these challenges, including a high contracting parties meeting for the Geneva Conventions in March and an international conference in June to establish a plan for the implementation of a two-state solution. Because there cannot be sustainable peace without a long-lasting solution to the root causes of the conflicts. And the Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank and the Israeli population all deserve a just and lasting peace. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Egeland for his briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of Algeria. Dear colleagues, I extend my deepest gratitude to you, Commissioner General Mr. Philippe Lazzarini and Mr. Jan Egeland for your briefings. Briefings which underscore once again how vital UNRWA is, not only for the Palestinian people, but for the entire region. Through you, I also thank the entire humanitarian community that continues to give so selflessly in support of the Palestinian people, especially in Gaza. These heroes, yes, these heroes risk their lives every day, and tragically, Gaza has become the deadliest conflict for humanitarian workers. It is our duty as the global community to protect them and to create an environment that allows them to continue their life-saving work in safety, in security. Dear colleagues, for over 75 years, UNRWA has been the lifeline for the Palestinian people. From birth to education, healthcare to food assistance, UNRWA has been an integral part of their lives. For generations of Palestinians, UNRWA is not just an agency. It is life itself. This role was especially crucial during the 15 months of the Israeli aggression against the Palestinian people in Gaza. UNRWA is the backbone of the humanitarian response, and its role remains essential under the ceasefire, as efforts continue to address the urgent needs of the Palestinian people. For Palestinians, for the humanitarian community, and for the international community, UNRWA is irreplaceable. UNRWA is indispensable. Without UNRWA, who would provide the 9,500 daily health consultations that the agency currently offers? Who would provide 1 million people with the critical mental health and psychological support that UNRWA offers? Who would provide food to 388,000 families whose survival depends on UNRWA? Who will provide, who will deliver vital water, sanitation, and hygiene services, as UNRWA currently does for around 44% of these services. And we will ensure that 660,000 children, Palestinian children, return to learning in UNRWA schools, which are their only opportunity for education. It is clear halting UNRWA's operations will be a death sentence for Palestinians, particularly for the most vulnerable among them. Refugees. Dear colleagues, attacks on UNRWA and disinformation campaign against this agency are not new. Since its inception, the agency has been under destructive assault. Why? Because it symbolizes the Palestinian refugee and their right to return, a right that no one can seriously deny. Palestinian refugees, like all refugees around the world, retain this inalienable right. The question of UNRWA's neutrality has been raised time and time again. However, as the Colonna reports confirm, and I quote, UNRWA possesses a more developed approach to neutrality than other similar UN or NGO entities. Despite these irrefutable facts, UNRWA continues to face serious attacks and allegations. Algeria believes that any such allegations should be independently and thoroughly investigated. We must not let false claim undermine UNRWA's crucial role in the life of millions of Palestinians. Dear colleagues, international law is clear. On the one hand, the Israeli occupying power has the responsibility and must ensure human treatment of the Palestinian population and meet all their needs. On the other hand, the Israeli occupying power does not have sovereign rights over the occupying Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. A principle upheld by Article 47 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. In addition, UNRWA, mandated by the UN General Assembly, acts on behalf of the UN members. The collective will of the international community cannot simply be disregarded by any member of the UN, including the occupying power. Furthermore, UNRWA's headquarters in Jerusalem enjoy immunity under the 1946 Convention. Therefore, the laws recently adopted by the Knesset and order issued that threaten the very existence of UNRWA are a clear violation of international law. We must stand united in opposition to these laws and call for their reversal, as they threaten not only the right of Palestinian refugees, but also the very fabric of international order. Dear colleagues, the very existence of the Palestinian people in their homeland, relies on the services provided by UNRWA. To halt its activities will serve the destructive plan aimed at erasing the presence of Palestinians between the river and the sea. Our responsibility is to support UNRWA and ensure that Palestinians are provided with the means to survive on their homeland with dignity, with hope for a better future. To this end, UNRWA must continue its mandate until the establishment of Palestinian state, with East Jerusalem as its capital. I thank you. I now resume my duty as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini and Secretary General Jan Egeland, for your briefings. The United States is strongly committed to implementing the ceasefire agreement so that the hostages can return home and the people of Gaza can look toward a brighter future under new leadership. We must never forget the lives taken as a result of the brutal Hamas terrorist attack on October 7th, 2023, and the horrors endured by countless innocent people in the war that followed. Hamas cannot be allowed to play spoiler on behalf of the Palestinians any longer. Not after it started this conflict through its horrific attack and its deplorable behavior. We have seen Hamas cynically weaponize the suffering of Palestinians by using civilian infrastructure, like schools and hospitals, to store caches of weapons, house fighters, and coordinate attacks. We are concerned about reports that returned Israeli hostages were held by Hamas in UN facilities during their prolonged captivity in Gaza. It is vital for a full and independent investigation to assess these very serious allegations. Unfortunately, this follows a pattern of serious allegations on the misuse of UN facilities, particularly UNRWA facilities, by Hamas terrorists. Today's briefing focuses on Israel's laws, set to go into effect on January 30th, that may impact UNRWA activities and prohibit contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. It is Israel's sovereign decision to close UNRWA's offices in Jerusalem on January 30th. The United States supports the implementation of this decision. UNRWA exaggerating the effects of the laws and suggesting that they will force the entire humanitarian response to halt is irresponsible and dangerous. What is needed is a nuanced discussion about how we can ensure that there is no interruption in the delivery of humanitarian aid and essential services. UNRWA is not and never has been the only option for providing humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Many other agencies have experience and expertise to do this work and have done this work. UNRWA's work has been tainted and its credibility questioned due to the terrorist ties to Hamas that UNRWA staff had that were exposed as a result of Hamas's October 7th attack. Colleagues, now is the time to ensure that humanitarian aid reaches those in need throughout Gaza. In accordance with the ceasefire deal, the United States, Qatar, and Egypt secured. We urge countries to support this effort through additional funding and resources to help quickly scale up and distribute much-needed humanitarian aid. We must ensure Hamas or other terrorist groups are not permitted to seize, divert, or profit from this assistance, and that if it does so, it is reported immediately and held accountable. Gaza must be fully demilitarized to provide a brighter future for the Palestinian people. Hamas should have no role in its governance. The region has suffered for too long from the nefarious influence of Iran and its terrorist proxies, who have exerted undue influence and destabilized the region for decades. As a result of the ceasefire, the countries of the Middle East have an historic opportunity to reshape their region in a way that affords its people a better path forward, where Israel is fully integrated with its neighbors under the banner of the Abraham Accords. The United States will do its part to help create that future. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Mr. President, thank you for organizing this important briefing. I also express Guyana's appreciation to UNRWA Commissioner General Philip Lazzarini and Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, for the valuable information and perspectives provided. We pay today a tribute to all humanitarian workers in Gaza, and given the focus of today's meeting, especially to Commissioner General Lazzarini and the staff of UNRWA, for their unwavering commitment and service in the face of immense challenges. Mr. President, as I said a few weeks ago, UNRWA is now at a critical crossroads with extremely difficult prospects ahead of it in light of the entry into force of certain aspects of the legislation adopted by the Israeli Knesset last October. The international community, including the General Assembly and Security Council, must do all in its power to safeguard UNRWA's role in the occupied Palestinian territory. Dismantling the agency's operations will have catastrophic consequences for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who depend on the agency's services. This is especially true at this time when Palestinians are seeking to recover from 15 months of brutal war and hardship. On this latter note, Guyana notes the unfolding developments in the Gaza Strip following the activation of the ceasefire agreement on 19th of January. We are pleased that the supply of humanitarian aid into Gaza has been ramped up, with hundreds of trucks, including UNRWA's, having entered since the start of the ceasefire. As a demonstration of its capacity to mobilize quickly and on a large scale, UNRWA brought in enough food to Gaza in 4 days to feed 1 million people. In fact, as Commissioner General Lazzarini reminded, 60% of all the food that came into Gaza since the start of the ceasefire has come in through UNRWA. Guyana urges that the parties continue to uphold their obligation to ensure the rapid, safe, unhindered, and sustained delivery of humanitarian aid to civilians in need. Palestinians in Gaza must receive our full support to rebuild their lives and livelihoods, and all impediments to this end must be removed. Mr. President, as international attention is pivoted towards recovery and reconstruction in Gaza, it is critical to keep in view the broader question of justice for the Palestinians in light of what they have experienced over the past 7 decades, and more so during the brutal war of the last 15 months. Record numbers have been killed and injured, and over 90% of all infrastructure, including homes and other critical infrastructure, have been damaged or destroyed, with piles of rubble as far as the eye can see. Yet, Mr. President, yesterday alone, we witnessed a throng of more than 200,000 Palestinians returning to their homes in North Gaza, and more will follow. They know the likelihood of finding their homes intact is almost zero, but they also know that this is their home, this is their land, even if flattened. As the famous Chilean poet Pablo Neruda wrote, "You can cut all the flowers, but you cannot prevent spring from coming." Even amidst the more than 50 million tons of rubble, it is this spring, this hope for a new day in an independent state of their own, and the drums of war silenced, that lies in the heart of every Palestinian, and which fuels their unparalleled resilience. Guyana therefore urges respect for the right of Palestinians to their territory, in line with the pre-1967 borders, and call on the international community to protect this right and reject any suggestions of involuntary resettlement. An effectively functioning UNRWA is also part of a just response to the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. We are all aware of the massive efforts that would be required for relief, reconstruction, and recovery in Gaza. UNRWA is the only agency that has the capacity and experience to facilitate the delivery of services to Gazans, both in the near and long term, at the required scale. Guyana therefore calls on the government of Israel not to take any actions with respect to UNRWA that would further jeopardize the situation of Palestinians in the occupied Palestinian territory. We further call on Israel to uphold its international legal obligations to this end, including those related to the privileges and immunities of UN agencies. Mr. President, while Palestinians are attempting to begin the recovery process in Gaza, developments in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, are alarming. Guyana condemns in the strongest terms the increasing violence in the occupied West Bank, which is leading to a deterioration of humanitarian and security conditions there. We urge all parties, including the Israeli security forces, to cease all violations of the rights of Palestinians in the West Bank. We also urge Israel to refrain from all actions that could potentially undermine the ceasefire in Gaza and lead to renewed conflagrations in the region. Mr. President, in the context of the evolving situation in the occupied Palestinian territory, Guyana highlights the following points. First, all efforts should be focused on ensuring that the ceasefire in Gaza continues to hold, including after its first phase. We urge the parties to continue to negotiate in good faith, prioritizing the well-being of civilians and the achievement of a permanent ceasefire. Second, all attempts to unilaterally dismantle UNRWA must cease. As has been said before, it is the General Assembly that created UNRWA's mandate. Therefore, it is only the General Assembly that can alter or terminate that mandate. Israel is obligated to cooperate with the UN to ensure that the needs of Palestinian refugees are met, as long as that question remains unresolved. Third, the cycle of uncertainty, flux, and violence to which Palestinians have been subject could only be brought to an end with the implementation of the two-state solution. Guyana urges this Council, particularly those with influence, to exert every effort to move the needle on implementation of the two-state solution. We cannot stick to the old ways of doing things if we are getting no results. The people of Palestine deserve much more. Guyana urges all Council members for us to work together to ensure that the upcoming June conference yields concrete results for the Palestinian people. Allow me to conclude by reiterating Guyana's full commitment to contributing to a better and peaceful future for Palestinians. We acknowledge UNRWA's critical role in this endeavor and express our full support for the agency and to doing everything possible to ensure it can continue fulfilling its mandate in the occupied Palestinian territory. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank UNRWA's Commissioner General, Mr. Lazzarini, and Mr. Jan Egeland of the Norwegian Refugee Council for the detailed yet sobering briefings. Mr. President, the greatest of humanity is not in being human, but in being humane. UNRWA, a UN agency with first-hand experience of more than 75 years in supporting the Palestinians in the Near East, has shown its compassion and discharged its duties in more than one way. It has provided vital humanitarian support to millions and delivered primary health services, education, and shelter. Greece is gravely concerned that after 15 months of destruction, pain and suffering in Gaza are still present. A deeply alarming fact, especially if we take into account the loyalty, devotion, and commitment of UNRWA in alleviating the suffering of the population. At this critical moment, UNRWA's role is pivotal and irreplaceable. Its valuable work should not be undermined. Greece proudly continues to support UNRWA, especially at its darkest hour. We had recently renewed a voluntary contribution and voted in favor of the General Assembly on the relevant draft resolution last December. At the same time, we are deeply concerned about the attacks on UNRWA's personnel. Humanitarian workers must be protected at all times in line with international humanitarian law. Mr. President, just a few days ago, we all welcomed with relief the ceasefire agreement, a deal which offers a unique opportunity to replace despair with hope. For that to happen, though, UNRWA must be allowed to play its part in the unimpeded distribution of humanitarian aid and reconstruction. Any day after scenario in the Gaza Strip should be written with its substantial support and expertise. And while there is hope for the future, there is literally power in the present. UNRWA has the power to deliver in the present, the power to protect the basic rights of thousands of people in Gaza, including children, and power which lies within UNRWA as the cornerstone of all humanitarian assistance in the Strip. In this regard, the international community should remain committed to the continuous support of the agency. In this context, we call on Israel to reconsider the implementation of the legislation, as it will obstruct UNRWA's capacity to operate within its mandate in all the occupied Palestinian territories. We fully understand Israel's concern, and in this respect, we believe that the full implementation of the recommendation of the Colonna report, in combination with the principle of neutrality, remains crucial. At the same time, the ceasefire agreements offer an opportunity for UNRWA and Israel to work together so that the agency can continue providing its essential services. Mr. President, in concluding, let me stress that the only long-term solution for the region is to revitalize the political process to pave the way of political horizon for a two-state solution according to the relevant Security Council resolution, while recognizing the right of Israel to exist in peace and security. Greece, as a founding member of the United Nations, strongly believes that UN agencies embody a collective hope for a peaceful, secure, and prosperous world. They provide lifeline support in regions where hundreds of lives are put at risk. Hence, the service to humanity is invaluable. After all, it should be remembered that there is no higher religion than human service. To work for the common good is the greatest creed. UNRWA can work for the common good in Gaza and deliver this service. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, благодарим делегацию Алжира за созыв брифинга по вопросу о судьбе БАПОР в контексте запрета его деятельности на оккупированной палестинской территории в результате принятых Кнессетом законов, которые на днях формально должны вступить в силу. Признательны за откровенные оценки генерального комиссара Филиппа Лазарини, а также за брифинг Яна Эгелана. Коллеги, Совет Безопасности неоднократно за последнее время обсуждал ситуацию вокруг шагов Израиля по запрету БАПОР. Члены Совета последовательно и недвусмысленно осуждают курс Западного Иерусалима на слом агентства, которое, как мы все понимаем, абсолютно незаменимо для жителей Газы и западного берега реки Иордан. Это следует и из последних отчетов ООН, указывающих, что значимая доля распределяемой среди населения помощи, в том числе той, которая массово начала поступать в анклав после заключения сделки между Израилем и Хамас, приходится именно на БАПОР. Крайне востребованы опыт, разветвленная система оказания гумсодействия и созданная за десятилетия инфраструктура агентства. При этом сегодня практически все жители сектора Газа могут быть отнесены к категории наиболее уязвимых групп населения, и БАПОР для них, по их собственному признанию, чуть ли не единственная оставшаяся в жизни опора. Однако, несмотря на все это, очевидно, что Израиль твердо нацелился лишить БАПОР возможности выполнять свою основную функцию, а газовитян – последнего спасательного круга. И это, несмотря на то, что выдвинутые израильтянами обвинения о несоблюдении агентством принципа нейтралитета и о причастности его 19 сотрудников к жестокой атаке ХАМАС, совершенной 7 октября 2023 года, так и не были подкреплены убедительными доказательствами. Кроме того, никакие обвинения не могут служить основанием для запрета работы БАПОР, которая создавалась не Израилем, а решением всего международного сообщества в 1949 году. Мы неоднократно подчеркивали, что израильские законодательные акты не только нарушают нормы международного права, включая Устав ООН, 4-ю Женевскую конвенцию и профильное решение Генеральной Ассамблеи, но и противоречат условиям приема Израиля в ООН в 1949 году, среди которых соблюдение и выполнение двух краеугольных резолюций Генеральной Ассамблеи 181 с планом раздела Палестины и 194 о палестинских беженцах. Более того, налагаемый Израилем запрет на деятельность агентства и отзыв о этой структуре привилегий и иммунитетов противоречит целям и принципам Всемирной организации, является грубым нарушением Западным Иерусалимом своих международно-правовых обязательств, в том числе проистекающих из Конвенции о привилегиях и иммунитетах Объединенных Наций. Ни одно государство не имеет права в одностороннем порядке лишать структурные подразделения ООН и их сотрудников привилегий и иммунитетов. Подобный подход делает бессмысленной саму концепцию привилегий и иммунитетов, призванную обеспечить беспрепятственное исполнение международными служащими своих обязанностей. В этой связи более решительную позицию должен занять генеральный секретарь ООН, поскольку грубое нарушение Конвенции о привилегиях и иммунитетах Объединенных Наций в данном случае очевидно. Промедление с запуском процедуры разрешения споров только поощряет дальнейшее нарушение со стороны Израиля, убеждая его в полной безнаказанности. Считаем востребованным и рассмотрение бапоровского досье в Международном суде ООН в рамках запроса на третье консультативное заключение об обязательствах Израиля в отношении дипломатического и ООНовского присутствия на оккупированной территории. Кроме того, Международный суд ООН в своем втором консультативном заключении от 19 июля о последствиях израильской оккупации констатировал, что Израиль не имеет права на суверенитет над какой-либо частью оккупированной палестинской территории или на осуществление суверенных полномочий на ней. Это же касается и запрета деятельности БАПОР. В довершение трагедии, разворачивающейся на наших глазах, агентство столкнулось с реальной угрозой физического уничтожения. За 15 месяцев конфликта убиты 273 сотрудника БАПОР. Это рекордные потери среди персонала ООН за всю историю организации. Более 200 объектов БАПОР разрушены. Десятки бапоровцев произвольно задержаны. Имеется информация о том, что они подвергаются пыткам. Осуждаем любые акты насилия в отношении ООНовцев. Выступаем против попыток силой заблокировать деятельность БАПОР в секторе Газа и на западном берегу реки Иордан, включая Восточный Иерусалим. Уважаемые коллеги, Израиль не посмел бы столь бесцеремонно бросать вызов международному сообществу и нарушать международное право, если бы не чувствовал абсолютную и безусловную военную и экономическую поддержку со стороны США. Вашингтон на протяжении всех 15 месяцев обострения Палестино-израильского конфликта поставлял ему оружие, из которого убивали мирных палестинцев, и не пропускал никаких решений Совета Безопасности, которые мешали бы Израилю реализовывать свои планы в Газе. Соединенные Штаты блокируют также и любые попытки выработать коллективные меры Совета по защите БАПОР. Поэтому не будет преувеличением сказать, что вина за происходящее вокруг агентства в полной мере лежит и на Соединенных Штатах. Вот и сегодня мы это услышали от представителя Соединенных Штатов ясно и четко. И согласно версии США, Израиль, оказывается, имеет право закрыть офис БАПОР в Иерусалиме. Интересно, как это согласуется с международным правом? Ответ – никак. Это очевидный пример. Так называемого Rules-Based International Order, порядка, основанного на правилах, который для Соединенных Штатов заменяет международное право. Призываем наших коллег в Вашингтоне одуматься и оказать необходимое давление на Западный Иерусалим, чтобы избежать еще больших страданий мирных палестинцев. Со своей стороны еще раз подтверждаем, что готовы включиться в проработку любых инициатив ООН, в том числе в рамках Совета Безопасности, нацеленных на сохранение присутствия БАПОР на ОПТ и обеспечение безопасности его персонала. Поддерживаем призывы Генерального секретаря ООН и Генерального комиссара БАПОР к Израилю и требуем от этой страны соблюдать свои международно-правовые обязательства и отменить законодательные акты. Важно отдавать себе отчет, что реализация закона о запрете деятельности БАПОР нанесет серьезный удар по перспективам и без того весьма хрупкого перемирия, в сохранении которого мы все заинтересованы. В завершение позвольте выразить неизменную поддержку БАПОР со стороны России и российского гражданского общества. Не так давно Международный общественный фонд, Российский фонд мира, номинировал агентство на Нобелевскую премию мира в 2025 году. Считаем данный шаг своевременным и заслуживающим широкой международной поддержки, учитывая незаменимую роль БАПОР в Газе и его принципиальную позицию, за которую расплатились своими жизнями 273 выполнявших свой долг сотрудника. Благодарю вас.
I thank the representatives of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président, je remercie le commissaire général de l'UNRWA ainsi que le secrétaire général du Norwegian Refugee Council pour leurs exposés. Je tiens à réaffirmer le plein soutien de la France à l'UNRWA ainsi qu'à son commissaire général. Depuis octobre 2023 et les attaques terroristes menées par le Hamas, l'UNRWA a été en première ligne pour porter secours à la population civile de l'enclave. 272 de ses collaborateurs sont décédés dans l'exercice de ses fonctions pendant cette période. Dès le 29 octobre dernier, la France a déploré l'adoption par le Parlement israélien de 2 lois visant l'UNRWA. Leur mise en œuvre priverait des centaines de milliers de civils d'une aide essentielle en matière d'abri, de soins, d'éducation et d'alimentation à Gaza et dans les territoires palestiniens occupés. Nous demandons aux autorités israéliennes de respecter leurs obligations vis-à-vis de cette agence des Nations Unies et de son personnel international et local. Il n'existe aucune, je dis bien aucune, alternative crédible à l'UNRWA. L'Office joue un rôle humanitaire, mais aussi fournit des services publics. Et il le fait à un coût 3 fois moindre que celui des autres agences des Nations Unies. L'UNRWA fait donc partie de la solution à Gaza et dans le reste des territoires occupés. L'accord sur le cessez-le-feu continue à être mis en œuvre. Il faut donc acheminer massivement de l'aide. Il faut aussi débuter sans attendre le travail de reconstruction et permettre aux enfants de Gaza de reprendre le chemin des écoles qui sont administrées par l'UNRWA. Tous les Palestiniens doivent aussi pouvoir accéder aux infrastructures de santé opérées par l'Office. L'UNRWA joue donc un rôle stabilisateur essentiel dans la bande de Gaza, mais aussi à Jérusalem et en Cisjordanie, ainsi que dans les pays hôtes. Il est donc dans l'intérêt d'Israël, notamment de sa sécurité, que l'UNRWA puisse opérer sans entrave. La France continuera d'être un partenaire de l'Office en 2025, comme elle l'a été depuis la création de celui-ci par une décision souveraine de l'Assemblée générale en 1949. Lors de la conférence humanitaire du 2 décembre dernier, la France a annoncé une nouvelle contribution de 50 millions d'euros pour la population de Gaza en 2025, dont 20 millions d'euros pour l'UNRWA. Elle continuera aussi de veiller à ce que soient mises en œuvre les réformes nécessaires à la neutralité de son action, notamment les recommandations du rapport Colonna. Monsieur le Président, si l'UNRWA existe encore 75 ans après sa création, c'est parce que la communauté internationale n'a pas encore été en mesure de régler la question palestinienne. Il est essentiel d'enclencher un processus irréversible pour la mise en œuvre effective de la solution à deux États. L'avenir de la bande de Gaza doit s'inscrire dans celui d'un futur État palestinien. Il faut éviter que le Hamas ne reprenne pied dans l'enclave et donc préparer le retour de l'autorité palestinienne qui a vocation à administrer ce territoire. C'est pour avancer sur la voie de la solution à deux États que la France coprésidera avec l'Arabie saoudite en juin prochain une conférence internationale à New York. Elle appelle les Israéliens et les Palestiniens à emprunter la seule voie qui leur garantira un avenir de paix et de sécurité. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank Algeria for requesting this meeting, supported by Somalia, focused on the work of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency of Palestinian Refugees in the Near East, UNRWA. I also thank Mr. Philip Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, and Mr. Jan Egeland, Secretary General, Norwegian Refugee Council, for their comprehensive and sobering briefings. Sierra Leone notes the extraordinary commitment demonstrated by UNRWA in providing life-saving and critical support to the Palestinian people, particularly in the past 15 months, and we pay tribute to the 269 personnel who have lost their lives since the start of the conflict in the Gaza Strip. We express our deepest condolences to the families and stand in solidarity with those adversely affected. Mr. President, since its establishment by General Assembly Resolution 302 of 1949, UNRWA has been and continues to be a beacon of hope for Palestinian refugees who have endured and continue to endure untold suffering in the occupied territories and even abroad. The agency's direct relief and works program, the provision of education, primary health care, and social services to millions of Palestinians across Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is a testament to its long-standing commitment to the welfare and human development of Palestinian refugees. Notwithstanding the challenges faced by UNRWA in the past 15 months due to the prolonged hostilities, direct strikes on installations, shelters, and facilities, and the insecurity of its workers, its resilience to deliver at scale and provide adequate humanitarian assistance and direct services to civilians in the Gaza Strip and its other areas of operations has been remarkable. Therefore, it is concerning to note that the recent developments pertaining to the discrediting of UNRWA and the two laws passed by the Knesset of Israel with regard to UNRWA's operation in the occupied Palestinian territory will only worsen the already catastrophic living conditions of millions of Palestinians and undermine international humanitarian efforts. While we welcome the ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas and are keenly monitoring its implementation, we remain disturbed by the increased suffering to the Palestinian people, as well as disruptions in UN humanitarian operations that are likely to occur if UNRWA, the backbone of humanitarian response in the Gaza Strip, is restricted or forced to cease its operations in the occupied Palestinian territory owing to these laws. In this regard, Sierra Leone would like to make the following observations. First, we acknowledge UNRWA's vital role as the mainstay of humanitarian response services to Palestinian refugees. We emphasize that UNRWA cannot be replaced by any other agency or entity, as the work they do for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and across the wider region is life-saving and immeasurable. As stated by the Secretary General in his response to the General Assembly on the implementation of Resolution ES 1026, quote unquote, UNRWA provides irreplaceable services from protection and education to healthcare to millions of Palestinians, and provides essential logistical and infrastructural support to the entire humanitarian system. Without UNRWA, the humanitarian response would risk collapse, further compounding the already catastrophic situation experienced by civilians in Gaza. Over the years, the agency has developed dynamic structures and systems that support unique needs of large and widespread vulnerable population it serves in the OPT and across several other countries. As tens of thousands of displaced Palestinians return home to northern Gaza to rebuild and restart their lives, we remain mindful of UNRWA's role in Gaza's reconstruction and recovery plan, including the provision of education to the 650,000 children and the 17,000 medical consultations administered daily through the primary health care services. Second, we note with serious concern the communication from the Secretary General addressed to the President of the General Assembly and the President of the Security Council, S/2025/18, bringing to attention the two laws of the Knesset of Israel adopted on 28 October 2024, and further outlining UNRWA's role in the occupied territory as contained in Resolution A/Res 302/1949. The Secretary General's communication and the various briefings received on the subject have established that the implementation of those laws runs contrary to the Security Council and General Assembly resolutions and rulings of the ICJ, with serious humanitarian consequences for Palestinian civilians. We therefore call on Israel to reconsider its decision to implement these laws. Third, we welcome the General Assembly Resolution 79232 of 19th December 2024, seeking legal clarity from the International Court of Justice through an advisory opinion on the obligations of Israel in relation to the presence and activities of the United Nations, other international organizations, and third states in and in relation to the occupied Palestinian territory. While we await the determination of the court, we are also of the view that full implementation of these legislations could have implications for Israel under international law and international humanitarian law, including provisions of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Additionally, we note the effort by UNRWA to implement the 50 specific time-bound and sequenced recommendations of the independent review of mechanisms and procedures to ensure adherence by UNRWA to the humanitarian principles of neutrality, i.e. the Colonial Report, through its high-level action plan, and invites the organization to continue such actions in line with the principles of international law. Establishing trust in UNRWA's organizational capacity, especially with regards to the principle of neutrality in all its operations, continues to be a priority for the UN and this Council at this pivotal time. In this regard, we fully support timely implementation of the recommendations in the report, especially those relating to frequent and effective communications with donor countries on UNRWA's operations and financial management, including through formal meetings with the UN. Mr. President, Sierra Leone appeals for adequate, predictable, and sustained support for UNRWA's operations and financial capacity, and also its services, until a just and lasting political solution to the plight of Palestinian refugees is found. We note with concern media reports of a communication from Israel informing the Secretary General that UNRWA is required to cease its operation in Jerusalem and evacuate all premises in which it operates in the city no later than 30th January 2025. As this Council supports efforts to ensure that the ongoing cessation of hostilities will peacefully transition into a permanent ceasefire that will allow the resumption of political dialogue, it is incumbent upon us to seek an urgent solution to this unfortunate impasse, such that Israel reconsiders the implementation of the two laws and that UNRWA's East Jerusalem headquarters are not taken over, but are retained as an integral central coordination point for humanitarian support and reconstruction efforts to the Palestinian people. We must swiftly work towards a solution that provides demonstrable assurances that UNRWA has in place effective neutrality mechanisms and procedures that enable it to provide its essential services to millions of Palestinians in strict compliance with the robust UNRWA neutrality framework that was developed in 2017 and has since been updated as part of the Colonna report. Sierra Leone remains committed to all efforts towards lasting peace, guided by the principles of the two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace, security, stability, and dignity. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank Commissioner General Lazzarini and Secretary General Egeland of the Norwegian Refugee Council for briefing us today. I also offer our condolences, again, for all UN and humanitarian staff who've been killed in this conflict, including 273 members of your team, Philippe. President, after 15 months of conflict, we now stand at a rare moment of hope for Palestinians and Israelis. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, we have a ceasefire deal that has seen 7 hostages returned, reunited with their families, and an end to the violence in Gaza that has claimed so many Palestinian lives. We cannot and must not forget the suffering that has brought us to this moment. Lives brutally cut short by Hamas. Men, women, and children abducted from their families, many of whom are still being held while their loved ones suffer in anguish. This conflict has also seen over 47,000 Palestinians killed. At least 35,000 children are thought to have lost one or both parents, and an estimated 20% of the population have been left with lifelong disabilities. The levels of destruction in Gaza are beyond belief. We must turn the page on the cycle of violence. I want to highlight key actions to support this. It is vital that we now see the release of all remaining hostages and a sustained ceasefire to allow us to move from phase 1 of the agreement through to further phases. Only then can we achieve lasting peace. We welcome reports that there has been an increase in humanitarian aid into Gaza. This needs to be sustained and complemented by much-needed supplies of commercial goods. To support this effort, my Minister for Development has today announced a further $21 million in funding to ensure healthcare, food and shelter reaches tens of thousands of civilians, and to support vital infrastructure across the occupied Palestinian territories. However, the implementation of Knesset legislation on UNRWA risks upending this humanitarian response, as well as threatening the fragile and hard-won gains made through the ceasefire deal. The vital work of UNRWA in ensuring that Palestinians have access to education and healthcare must also be protected in Gaza, as well as the West Bank and East Jerusalem. These represent the most fundamental of human rights. For this reason, the United Kingdom urges Israel, once again, to ensure that UNRWA can continue its life-saving operations and provision of essential services across the occupied Palestinian territories. We call on Israel to work urgently with international partners, including the UN, so there is no disruption to this vital work. Israel is obligated under international law to facilitate humanitarian assistance by all means at their disposal. We stand ready to work alongside Israel, the UN, and our partners to assist. We also call on UNRWA to continue to deliver their commitment to neutrality. Implementation of reforms to strengthen their neutrality remain critical. We welcome UNRWA's commitment to fully investigate any allegations against their employees and the continued implementation of the Coroner Report's recommendations. We have earmarked over $1.2 million of our funding to UNRWA to support their implementation. President, the United Kingdom will play our full part in the coming days and weeks to seize the opportunity of this ceasefire for a better future, to ensure it leads to a credible pathway towards a two-state solution in which Israelis and Palestinians can live side by side in peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. And let me also thank Commissioner General Lazzarini and Secretary General Egeland for their important and sobering briefings. And let me, through you, extend our gratitude to the entire humanitarian community working selflessly to alleviate the situation in Gaza and express our condolences and regrets for the many humanitarians and UN workers killed. Mr. President, we're just 2 days away from the Israeli legislation on UNRWA coming into effect. As we've heard today, UNRWA's role far exceeds the crucial humanitarian role it currently plays in Gaza. For the past 75 years, UNRWA has provided Palestine refugees with essential government-like services. This includes education and primary health care, which has aided generations of Palestine refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as well as the wider region. Since Hamas' brutal terrorist attack against Israel and the conflict in Gaza which followed, UNRWA has been the lifeline for civilians in Gaza. Under extremely difficult circumstances, the agency has kept Palestinians alive by delivering food to a population on the verge of famine, shelter to 400,000 persons who have been repeatedly displaced, primary health care for 1.6 million people, and water to 600,000 people. UNRWA plays a critical role in the entire humanitarian aid operation in Gaza. Other humanitarian organizations and UN agencies rely on it for infrastructure, for staff, common services, as well as last-mile support. Mr. President, without UNRWA, civilians in Gaza risk losing a vital safety net, and Palestine refugees in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, risk losing their access to basic services. Basic services that UNRWA has a unique mandate from the General Assembly to deliver to Palestine refugees until a two-state solution is realized. We note that the Secretary General, in his letter of 8 January, emphasized that, and I quote, "There is currently no realistic alternative to UNRWA, which could adequately provide the services and assistance required by Palestine refugees in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem." End of quote. Mr. President, all of this is taking place in the context of the recent ceasefire in Gaza. We welcome this long-awaited ceasefire, which must allow for acceleration of the delivery of aid, proper medical care, emergency shelter, and for a resumption of basic services, as well as the vital clearance of unexploded ordnance and rubble. At this critical time, UNRWA is needed more than ever, and is equipped and ready to deliver. As the occupying power, Israel has a clear obligation under international humanitarian law to ensure Palestinians have access to basic services and to ensure the protection of the civilian population. Mr. President, regarding the allegations about the involvement of UNRWA staff in Hamas' horrific attack on 7 October, we welcome the prompt reply and prompt follow-up by the Secretary General and Commissioner General Lazzarini. We welcome important steps taken by UNRWA to implement internal reforms to ensure neutrality and the recent update on the implementation of the Colonna recommendations in this regard. We continue to follow the implementation closely and urge UNRWA to show maximum care in their operations. Mr. President, to conclude, following 15 months of devastating war, the recent ceasefire finally offered hope. Hope that hundreds of thousands of Gazan civilians could receive the help they need. It is therefore distressing that it is this critical moment when the international community can massively scale up its support, the Knesset laws on UNRWA kick in. Mr. President, now is the time to commit to a lasting peace, a two-state solution where Palestinians and Israelis alike can live in peaceful coexistence. Without UNRWA, millions of Palestinians risk losing access to basic services. Without UNRWA, the situation in the region may further destabilize, jeopardizing all the prospects for a two-state solution. I thank you.
The representative of Denmark for the statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Pakistan thanks Algeria for convening this timely meeting to address the difficult situation that UNRWA is facing. We also thank Commissioner General Philippe Lazzarini, as well as Secretary General Jean Eglin, for their comprehensive and sobering briefings. These briefings have highlighted the urgent need for international action to provide humanitarian assistance to and to safeguard UNRWA's humanitarian mission in the occupied Palestinian territories, particularly in Gaza. We would like to thank all humanitarian agencies who are working in Gaza to address the catastrophe that the Palestinian people are facing. In particular, UNRWA's role is critical. After witnessing 15 months of unimaginable death and destruction in Gaza perpetrated by Israel, the ceasefire agreement between Hamas and Israel, announced on 15 January 2025, offers a glimmer of hope. Pakistan has welcomed the agreement and deeply appreciates the mediatory efforts made by Egypt, Qatar, and the United States. We hope that all stages of the ceasefire agreement will be fully implemented and that the ceasefire will become permanent, including the full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza and full, rapid, and unhindered humanitarian assistance to the suffering and displaced population of Gaza. We have, of course, noted the threats which have been held out from Israel about the possibility of resuming attacks. We are also concerned that action has so far not been taken by the Security Council to halt Israel's and the settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. Mr. President, while we seek to preserve peace in Gaza and the West Bank, we should help the Palestinians develop a comprehensive plan for the provision of adequate humanitarian assistance, as well as for the reconstruction of Gaza, as envisaged in Security Council Resolution 2735, and mobilize adequate international resources for their implementation. Mr. President, for the implementation of the ceasefire, the provision of adequate humanitarian assistance, and for reconstruction of Gaza, the role of UNRWA remains critical. For over 7 decades, UNRWA has been a beacon of hope for millions of Palestinian refugees across the region. Allowing UNRWA to be dismantled will undermine the ceasefire agreement and derail any chance for Gaza's recovery and political transition. With its extensive network of schools, healthcare facilities, and humanitarian services, UNRWA remains unmatched and indispensable in its capacity to provide life-saving assistance, the resumption of education for hundreds and thousands of children, and the continued provision of healthcare to millions. It would also be critical for the reconstruction of Gaza. Mr. President, UNRWA and its heroic personnel have continued to operate within the occupied Palestinian territory, especially Gaza, in the face of directed attacks against them, in which 370 of their personnel have perished. The viability and survival of UNRWA is being threatened today by the implementation, I'm told within the next 48 hours, of the Israeli legislation adopted by the Knesset on 28 October 2024. This legislation banning UNRWA's activities violates the UN Charter, international law, and the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice of 19 July 2024. Israel has no right, as the occupying power, to close down any UN facility, in particular UNRWA's office in East Jerusalem, or any other UN international facility established in the occupied Palestinian territories under a mandate of the United Nations. Israel's continued actions defy the international community, as reaffirmed in General Assembly resolutions renewing UNRWA's mandate. Israel's allegations against UNRWA have not been established. This should be clear. The Colonna report does not establish these allegations. But whatever doubts may be there should be disproved through a full UN investigation. By targeting UNRWA, Israel seeks not only to dismantle the structures that are critical to provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people, but also to erode the identity of the Palestinian people and the rights that they possess, and to undermine the aspirations for justice and peace. As Commissioner General Lazzarini rightly observed at the last meeting, allowing a UN-mandated agency to be obstructed by national legislation would make a, and I quote, a mockery of international law and our multilateral system. The UN Secretary General, in his letter of 9 December 2024, emphasized that as a UN member state, Israel is obligated under Article 2.5 of the Charter to assist UNRWA in its work. The General Assembly's Resolution 79/232 of 19 December further underscores this obligation and condemns Israeli measures that obstruct the UN and UNRWA operations. Mr. President, Pakistan expresses its deep concern over these actions and stands in resolute solidarity with the Palestinian people. We reaffirm our unwavering support to UNRWA's mission, rooted in GA Resolution 302 of 1949, which mandates the agency to carry out direct relief work for Palestinians pending a just solution to their plight in accordance with UN General Assembly Resolution 194. Finally, Mr. President, we must advance an inclusive political process to achieve the two-state solution. This remains the most promising, equitable, and feasible framework for durable peace between Israel and the Palestinians and the Arabs and the Muslim world. Pakistan will work to this end as a member of the Global Alliance for Implementation of the Two-State Solution. We must resist steps that are designed to extinguish the Palestinians' right to self-determination and statehood. We should instead take steps to make the two-state solution inevitable, including by global recognition of the State of Palestine and its early admission as a full member of the United Nations. We welcome, in this context, the General Assembly's decision Resolution 79/81 to convene a high-level international conference in June 2025 to be hosted by France and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where we hope we will agree on an irreversible path to achieve the two-state solution consistent with the UN resolutions and international law. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement, and now I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席，我感谢阿尔及利亚倡议召开今天的会议，感谢扎拉里尼主任专员和杨埃格兰先生的通报。中方重申对联合国近东巴勒斯坦难民救济和工程处的坚定支持。对工程处近来面临由人为因素造成的困难表示严重关切。我们呼吁以色列停止对工程处的限制和打击，停止执行有关法案。我们呼吁国际社会继续支持工程处履职，支持联合国和安理会为保障工程处履职采取必要的紧急行动。我谈以下几点：第一，支持工程处关乎维护国际法治和多边体系的权威。工程处是联大决议授权成立的机构，享有特权和豁免，其尊严、安全、便利应该得到保障。以色列打压工程处的做法同联合国宪章和国际法规定的义务不符，将开创恶劣的先例，造成广泛的消极后果。第二，支持工程处关乎几百万加沙民众的生存。当前的加沙停火为缓解人道灾难提供了机会。1月19日起实施的停火协议也包含有扩大人道援助的承诺。工程处承担着加沙一半以上的援助工作，其作用不可或缺，无法替代。打压工程处同扩大人道救援的承诺是相互矛盾的。工程处更是唯一能够向加沙提供教育的机构，不能缺席加沙的战后重建安排。第三，支持工程处关乎约旦河西岸的社会稳定。工程处是西岸公共服务的重要提供方，是西岸经济社会的重要组成部分。一旦工程处停摆，将导致西岸的教育、医疗等公共服务关闭，还会使大量巴勒斯坦人民失去生活和收入来源，这将对西岸的社会稳定造成严重的冲击。第四，支持工程处关乎巴勒斯坦问题的政治解决。工程处从来都不是永久性机构，但在巴勒斯坦实现民族自决之前，在两国方案真正落实之前，工程处 仍然不可或缺。如果要创造条件让工程处完成使命，首先需要的是国际社会加大努力重振两国方案，共同抵制破坏两国方案的单边行动，包括改变加沙人口和领土、吞并约旦河西岸等危险企图。主席，我们强调，关于工程处中立性问题的争论早已结束。秘书长任命的独立审查小组已发布报告，明确指出工程处设有大量健全机制，确保中立性。个别人员的不当行为不能上升为工程处的整体行为，对个别人员的处理也不应影响工程处整体的人道属性。我们希望对工程处提出指控的国家可以向工程处分享证据。最后，我要重申，联合国和安理会有责任为保障工程处履职采取必要的紧急行动，防止给加沙民众施加新的集体惩罚。中方愿继续同各方一道，为缓解人道灾难、恢复巴以和平、实现地区长治久安做出不懈努力。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for the statement. Ahora doy la palabra al representante de Panamá.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Agradecemos la convocatoria de esta sesión y saludamos la participación de las delegaciones de Cabo Verde, Egipto, España, Islandia, Israel, Jordania, Senegal y el Estado observador de Palestina. También extendemos nuestro agradecimiento al comisionado general de la UNRWA, señor Lazzarini, y al señor Jan Egeland, secretario general del Consejo Noruego para los Refugiados, por sus valiosos informes sobre la situación de la agencia en los territorios palestinos ocupados. Panamá rinde homenaje a los trabajadores de la UNRWA y de otras agencias humanitarias que han perdido la vida en el cumplimiento de su labor, así como a aquellos que siguen arriesgando su seguridad para asistir a los más necesitados. Su sacrificio es un testimonio del compromiso con los principios fundamentales de humanidad y el derecho internacional humanitario, lo cual refuerza la importancia de sus mandatos en un contexto tan desafiante. Entre el 7 de octubre de 2023 y el 19 de enero de 2025, transcurrieron 440 días en los que la población civil ha pagado el mayor costo, con más de 46.000 muertos, decenas de miles de heridos y millones de desplazados. La situación humanitaria en los territorios palestinos ocupados sigue siendo crítica y el acceso a la ayuda sigue siendo un desafío en muchas áreas. A pesar de los esfuerzos por mantener la tregua, observamos con profunda preocupación las alteraciones al alto al fuego, que incluyen el incumplimiento por parte de Hamás al no liberar a los rehenes según lo acordado. Esta acción ha tenido un impacto directo en el acceso a la ayuda humanitaria y en el retorno de los desplazados. Además, erosiona la confianza entre las partes, que es imprescindible mantener para finalmente implementar el tan anhelado alto al fuego. En este contexto, la UNRWA ha jugado un papel crucial, proporcionando asistencia a más de 1.6 millones de personas en necesidad, incluyendo alimentos, atención médica, apoyo psicosocial y educación. Es esencial que se garantice y asegure la protección del personal y las instalaciones de Naciones Unidas en todo momento. De igual manera, consideramos necesario reforzar el financiamiento continuo y sostenible para que se pueda seguir brindando asistencia vital a los refugiados palestinos. Señor presidente, Panamá respalda la misión de las agencias humanitarias y los esfuerzos internacionales para aliviar la crisis en los territorios palestinos ocupados. Consideramos fundamental asegurar que tanto las agencias humanitarias y las organizaciones no gubernamentales puedan operar garantizando que ni ellas ni sus trabajadores sean utilizados en el marco del conflicto. Por ello, hacemos un llamado a la comunidad internacional para fortalecer la seguridad de los trabajadores humanitarios, para que sean protegidos en todo momento y que las agencias humanitarias puedan seguir cumpliendo con su mandato sin obstáculos. Muchas gracias.
Agradezco al representante de Panamá por su declaración. And now I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Mr. President. We thank Algeria for organizing this debate, and Commissioner Lazzarini and Mr. Egeland for their contribution. Mr. President, UNRWA has been at the center of our discussions for many months now. With its unique mandate, UNRWA is a lifeline for Palestinian refugees, the social fabric of its areas of operation, and a backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza. It has become a factor of regional stability and an expression of our joint commitment to finding a political solution to the conflict. It was created to protect and assist Palestine refugees until a just and lasting solution to their plight was found. The agency remains essential. It is for these reasons we continue calling for the strengthening of the agency, including through the implementation of the recommendations contained in the Colonna report. It is also for these reasons Slovenia has spoken against the legislation since it was in the preparatory phase. Slovenia condemned its adoption in October last year. Its implementation would have catastrophic consequences. Why? One, this legislation undermines the implementation of the ceasefire agreement. Gaza is an unprecedented humanitarian crisis marking our generation, and UNRWA helps people in Gaza to survive. As the backbone of the humanitarian response, UNRWA is essential to scaling up the delivery of humanitarian aid, including now with the critical opportunity presented by the ceasefire. Two, this legislation undermines the recovery of Gaza and the quality of life in the occupied Palestinian territory. The people of Gaza have lost far too much. Once the humanitarian situation improves, the role of the agency will remain essential to continue providing government-like services. UNRWA needs to continue helping to provide opportunities for Palestinians to build a better life. The ceasefire is a stepping stone to lasting peace, and UNRWA is crucial in supporting that peace both in the short and long term. UNRWA is indispensable on the path to the two-state solution. Yet let me be clear, it cannot and should not be permanent, as stipulated in its mandate defined by the General Assembly. Once a political solution is achieved, its services will eventually need to be transferred to the Palestinian government. 3, this legislation offers no alternative. There is no alternative to the agency, nor in the spirit and not in practice. In relation to opposing claims, it is necessary to underline that Israel has not demonstrated that there could be an alternative, clearly showing no intention of doing so. We continue underlining Israel's obligations under international humanitarian and international human rights law. The Secretary General's letter of 9 December is clear. In the event that UNRWA is compelled to cease its activities in the OPT, Israel would be left to ensure that the range of services and assistance which UNRWA has been providing are provided. Regrettably, we have not heard any such assurances from the Israeli government. 4, this legislation would undermine the United Nations and the support of member states to Palestinian refugees. We underline our concern over any attempt to dismantle a UN agency and the impact of this action on the work of the United Nations in the field as a whole. UNRWA is an agency which is mandated by the decision of the UN General Assembly, supported by over 150 countries. More than 150 countries who want to help Palestinian refugees and not attack any particular country. However, this will of the international community should not be undermined or disregarded by the occupying power. Yet this legislation inevitably shrinks operational space for humanitarian action. 5, this legislation can affect regional stability. Throughout the decades of its work, UNRWA has provided unmatched scale of services, experiences, and access, enjoying the trust of the beneficiaries who access its tailored assistance. This is true for Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, as it is the case for the other 3 areas of its operation. After a spiral of violence and escalations, we need to do everything to stabilize this part of the world, not further jeopardize it. Further entrenching the suffering of the Palestinians will not bring us any closer to peace. Mr. President, Slovenia looks forward to the day when UNRWA's services are no longer needed. A time when Palestinians live in their own state and both Israelis and Palestinians can coexist peacefully and securely next to one another. However, until that day arrives, the challenges remain urgent and UNRWA's work essential. We once again call on the Israeli government to refrain from implementing the legislation as it risks undermining both the progress made and the future we still hope to build. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Somalia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Somalia extends its gratitude to the Algerian delegation for convening this vital session today. We also want to welcome Commissioner General Mr. Filippi Lazzarini and Secretary General Mr. Jan Egeland, and thank them for their illuminating and critical situation facing the Palestinian people. For over 7 decades, United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East, UNRWA, has been an indispensable lifeline for millions of Palestinian refugees, providing essential services in education, healthcare, and social support. Yet, today, its very existence is under direct threat from recent legislative measures passed by the Knesset of Israel. These measures aim to restrict UNRWA's operations and undermine its ability to deliver vital services. This cannot be seen as anything other than a deliberate attempt to exacerbate the suffering of an already vulnerable populations. Actions in targeting UNRWA ability to function represent an assault on the basic rights of millions of refugees who depend on these services for their survival. UNRWA currently supports more than 5.9 million Palestinian refugees across the region. Its education program alone provides critical schooling to over 540,000 children, fostering not only education, but also hope and stability in communities that has seen little or either. In healthcare services, encompassing primary and emergency care, are vital to the health and well-being of millions of Palestinians. Any disruption to these services does not just deepen human suffering, it systematically dismantles the infrastructure that enables these communities to survive. Mr. President, such actions are not only morally indispensable or indefensible, but also a blatant violation of international law. These actions directly contravene Israel's obligation as an occupying power under the 4th Geneva Convention to ensure the welfare of the population under its control. No attempt to undermine UNRWA can negate these fundamental legal duties. Restricting the operations of UNRWA, an agency that has consistently operated with neutrality and transparency, undermines global efforts to address the root causes of this decades-long crisis, to work toward peace and stability. Where despair grows, so too do the risk of further conflict. As we have seen in other regions of the world, experiencing prolonged crisis, failing to address basic human needs, often leads to perpetuation of violence and insecurity. We must recognize that the challenges facing Palestinian refugees are not isolated. They resonate across the world, where similar challenges of displacement, access to basic services, and conflict-induced vulnerabilities are all too familiar. We must view this issue not only through humanitarian lenses, but a matter of global peace and security. The challenges faced by Palestinian refugees are interconnected with the broader regional stability, and failure to address this issue adequately risks further displacement. In today's interconnected world, the deepening of humanitarian crisis can no longer be viewed in isolation. Moreover, the international community has a moral responsibility to ensure that UNRWA's vital work continues unhindered. We must collectively demand that Israel immediately cease its attempt to restrict agencies' work and comply fully with its obligations under the international law. Furthermore, we must reaffirm our commitment to ensuring UNRWA has the resources and political support it needs to continue its essential mission. UNRWA's mission must continue until we achieve a comprehensive political solution, an independent Palestinian state within 1967 borders, East Jerusalem as its capital, and the implementation of the refugees' right of the return under the UN Resolution 194. While we welcome the recent ceasefire, which brings hope for millions, it must serve as a stepping stone toward just and lasting peace, not merely a temporary respite. The international community cannot afford or allow these attacks on neutral humanitarian agency to succeed. To do so will not only fail the Palestinian refugees, but also betray the principles of justice, human rights, and accountability that underpin our work. In closing, this is a moment that calls for solidarity and action. The Palestinian cause demands more than temporary solutions. It requires justice and lasting solution, in particular, the end of the occupation, the Palestinian territory, and full recognition of a free, sovereign, and independent Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital in accordance with the relevant resolutions of the Security Council and the General Assembly. Until we achieve this, UNRWA remains an essential lifeline that we must preserve and support. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Somalia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President, for convening this timely meeting. I would also like to thank UNRWA Commissioner General Lazzarini and Mr. Egeland of Norwegian Refugee Council for their briefings. Mr. President, the current deal for the ceasefire and the release of hostages provides us a crucial chance to ease the vast humanitarian suffering in Gaza. All possible means to scale up vital assistance should be mobilized, and we commend the relentless efforts by various UN agencies to this end. In this regard, we welcome the recent announcement by OCHA that large volumes of unhindered humanitarian aid have been entering Gaza since the ceasefire began, and that law and order there have also significantly improved. We particularly recognize the vital role that UNRWA has been playing in the provision of life-saving assistance to Palestinians in Gaza, both during the hostilities and under the ceasefire. Noting the urgency required to greatly enhance the volume of humanitarian commodities in Gaza, as well as to transition to the daunting reconstruction process, UNRWA's staff, almost all of whom are local Palestinians with expertise, as well as its logistically important facilities, must be harnessed at maximum capacity. Having said that, we recall that it is Israel's obligation under international humanitarian law to ensure that civilians in Gaza have access to basic necessities. UNRWA, which has delivered 60% of the food entering Gaza since the ceasefire commenced, has been consistent in its commitment to work tirelessly in food and other aid distribution throughout Gaza, despite having 272 staff members killed since October 7, the heinous terrorist attack by Hamas. Mr. President, we recognize the crucial role of UNRWA in providing basic services, including healthcare and education, to generations of Palestinian refugees in need, not only in Gaza and the West Bank, but also in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, until the realization of a just and lasting solution to the Palestinian question. In this regard, we also note that the Palestinian refugees registered with UNRWA in neighboring countries outnumber those registered in Gaza and the West Bank. Any allegation in one region of operation should not impede the vital services provided by UNRWA in other regions. Mr. President, we encourage UNRWA to fully implement measures to uphold the principle of neutrality, as reflected in its high-level action plan to implement the Colonna report's recommendations. We also note that the UN has expressed many times its will to keep investigating the serious allegations with regard to its personnel, should adequate information be shared regarding possible connections with Hamas. Mr. President, UNRWA now faces existential challenges in the occupied Palestinian territory, as the implementation of Israeli legislation is imminent, with a wide range of uncertainty on its exact modalities and impacts. We believe that Israel will remain committed to and fulfill its legal obligations, including those under the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the UN, as expressed in its representative's letter in December, which is interrelated with the fate of UNRWA headquarters in East Jerusalem. We also note the Secretary General's letter saying Israel has an obligation under Article 2 of the Charter to give the UN every assistance in any action it takes. We hope that Israel will guarantee the necessary conditions for UN staff to continue their work, which include administrative measures such as the issuance of proper visas for international staff. Mr. President, the Republic of Korea has maintained its steadfast support for UNRWA, as well as all other humanitarian agencies of the United Nations, and we will continue to provide both political and financial support to ensure the basic services and humanitarian assistance provided by the UN to Palestinians in need. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. I would like to remind everyone that this is an official meeting of the Security Council. I would like also to remind all participants and speakers in today's discussion to engage in the meeting with the utmost respect and to observe appropriate standards of tone, wording, and content in their remarks. Remarks which should be addressed to the Presidency. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine.
Mr. President, thank you for organizing this important meeting, and thank Algeria in this regard. Allow me also to thank Commissioner General Lazzarini for his remarkable and continued service, and through him, to express our deep appreciation to UNRWA staff who have shown great dedication and courage in trying to preserve life in Gaza at the peril of their own. Allow me further to thank Mr. Jan Egeland for his briefing and the NRC for their role, and through him, thank all humanitarian organizations who have tried to help the Palestinian people in impossible conditions and at great risk. UN staff and humanitarians deserve to be better protected, and we have a duty to hold accountable those who have shown such disregard for the most fundamental rules of our international law-based order, leaving international humanitarian law in tatters and immediate need of reinforcement. Mr. President, Israel has destroyed everything in Gaza. Everything. Except the sacred bond between a people and their land. Their roots run too deep. Their history covers millennia. The wounds of their Nakba have yet to heal. So by hundreds of thousands, they are going back to the north from which they were uprooted and expelled by the occupying power. Yesterday, in 2 hours, Mr. President, 200,000 Palestinians marched walking from the south to the north. Old men and women holding a tired cane, small children who have just recently learned to walk, families carrying whatever they can of what remains of who they are, men and women, exhausted, bereaved, sometimes injured, finding the energy to take one step after another to reverse this latest forcible displacement, survivors of a genocide fighting against ethnic cleansing. They know they are returning to find ruins, that their homes have been destroyed, their neighborhoods have been obliterated, their schools and hospitals have been bombed. They know that all the requirements of life have been deliberately targeted, and yet, still, they went back. That image tells you all you need to know about the Palestinian people. This is who we are. Their tragedy, their pain, and agony, all that they have endured, and the wish of Israel to humiliate them and to make them suffer, even as refugees returning to destroyed refugee camps, not to their villages and towns, but also this image shows their resilience, their steadfastness, their inability to surrender, and just how much they belong to this land, and this land belongs to them. This is the Palestinian struggle, a simple dream, living in freedom and dignity in their ancestral land. Mr. President, Israel thought by destroying everything, Palestinians would have to leave. It has often made this miscalculation, and now they're trying again in the refugee camps in Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, Tubas, and East Jerusalem. That by making our people's lives more miserable, more unbearable, more impossible, it will get rid of the Palestinians. And it is again this miscalculation that is behind its attacks against UNRWA. Israel has been attacking UNRWA long before October 7 and at that time, it did not try to conceal its objectives. It wanted to end the refugee problem, to erase rights that cannot be erased, that are inalienable. The idea is simple. To get rid of the refugees, you just try and destroy the agencies serving them. If there is no education, no health, no assistance, they will surrender. They will leave. They will abandon the land and their dream of liberation and return. UNRWA makes the lives of our people better, but it is not the reason they have a right of return. And it is not what connects them to the land. And it is not their identity, nor their refusal to relinquish it. If you think that by destroying, displacing, impoverishing communities, you will have peace, you are terribly mistaken. UNRWA was created to alleviate the damage caused by Israel and this prolonged conflict to the lives and rights of Palestinian refugees. First, to offer emergency assistance, and then to offer human development, to restore hope in places of despair, to help people to rebuild their lives, to rebuild communities, to protect and support in times of crisis and upheaval, until a just solution to their plight as required by equity and justice as enshrined in UN resolutions, including Resolution 194. Mr. President, UNRWA's mandate stems from a decision of the international community as a whole, taken over 7 decades ago and renewed with overwhelming support ever since. This mandate, repeatedly renewed by the General Assembly and overwhelmingly reaffirmed as again on the 11th of December in Resolution ES-10/25, ends once the question of Palestine is resolved in all its aspects in accordance with international law and the relevant UN resolutions. If anything, this latest man-made humanitarian catastrophe and unprecedented crisis demonstrate the urgency to implement such a solution. Mr. President, we all refer to UNRWA as the backbone of the humanitarian response in Gaza, forgetting that this was not its core mandate, but rather its response to unforeseen tragic events. UN staff and humanitarians paid a very high price for their attempts to help a people being deliberately targeted and starved and forcibly displaced. Yet UNRWA continues to possess the personnel capacity and infrastructure to carry out the monumental tasks imposed by the emergency situation on the ground. But UNRWA's long-standing role remains to provide education, primary health care, human development opportunities to millions of Palestinian refugees across the region, in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem, and in Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. This is UNRWA's mandate on behalf of the international community. No one other than the General Assembly can unilaterally alter this mandate, imperative for the well-being of millions and for regional stability. There are 2 organized forces, Mr. President, that can respond to the prevailing disastrous conditions and restore life and hope for the Palestinian people with the support of the international community: the Palestinian government and UNRWA. And yet, Israel is demanding that everyone forsake them and work around them. setting us all up for failure. The consequences and repercussions will be grave. There is no alternative to the Palestinian government, and there is no alternative to UNRWA. Israel that destroyed Gaza and openly aims at getting rid of the Palestinian people does not get to pick and choose who represents the Palestinian people or who represents the UN. It does not get to distort the law and the narrative. It does not get to claim some sort of exceptional status that allows it to commit crimes and enjoy impunity. The problem is not the rules, but their breach. It is not the courts trying to uphold them, but the perpetrators persisting in the commission of crimes. It is not the UN, but rather refusing to do what is necessary to preserve and respect our international law-based order. International law must be upheld. ICJ advisory opinions and provisional measures orders must be respected. Continuing to allow Israel to act as a state above the law is a recipe for only more conflict and disaster. In this regard, we reiterate, Israel has absolutely no sovereignty rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem. Its presence in our territory is unlawful, and this illegal occupation in its entirety must come to an end. The only sovereign in this territory is the Palestinian people. International law is clear in this regard. The Charter is clear in this regard. The determinations of the ICJ are clear in this regard. The Security Council has also been absolutely clear in this regard. Most recently, in Resolution 2334, the Council must implement its resolutions without exception. Claims that Israel has a sovereignty in occupied East Jerusalem and can act accordingly, including with regard to the status of UNRWA compound, a UN property covered by the 1946 Convention on Privileges and Immunities, contradicts these resolutions, which are binding upon all. Mr. President, the UN member attacking this organization from within its halls, from within this room, openly attempting to destroy a UN agency, killing, maiming, and arresting UN staff, trying to take over, to steal UN premises in occupied East Jerusalem after having destroyed numerous ones in Gaza, this is a very dangerous precedent. If we allow it to pass, then all agencies are in danger. These United Nations are in danger. The entire international community has come to the defense of UNRWA, both at the General Assembly and the Security Council. The international community has affirmed its trust with how the UN respond to allegations and maintained that UNRWA was irreplaceable. For months and years now, Israel has tried to create a rift between the agency and its supporters. We must stand united to defend the agency, the people it serves, and what it stands for. Its role is more needed today than ever. Those who are trying to destroy it need to be defeated in this regard. Mr. President, this is a race against time, for life, for human development, for freedom, for peace. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians headed north, walking north, refusing to wait a single minute, risking their lives yet again. They are the story They are the story. Hear it loud and clear. They are the story. Their long walk to freedom has lasted way too long. How many more years do you want us to keep walking for freedom? We've been walking for 80 years. It is our right to have freedom. It is our right to have the implementation of our inalienable rights, including our right to self-determination, statehood, and the right of the refugees to return. It is time for them to reach their destination. And we will, and we should reach our destination, and soon to reach freedom, to reach independence, and to live in dignity in our independent state of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. The world owes them that. It is your obligation to deliver to us that since you got involved in our case from its inception, then it is your duty to complete this exercise by fulfilling our rights, the rights of the Palestinian people. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in refugee camps in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, also continue to rely on UNRWA for their well-being and protection, which are under direct and escalating threats as Israeli occupying forces and settlers intensify their attacks, causing loss of life and destruction of property and further forced displacement. The international community cannot ignore the rising violence and instability and cannot leave them without protection in this critical moment. We therefore reiterate our standing appeals to the international community to continue their historic accompaniment of our people on this long and painful journey, of which UNRWA has been a central part and must remain so until its mandate is fulfilled with the realization of their rights and the just and peaceful solution we overcome all obstacles to achieve. Millions are depending on us, and we must not fail them. Millions of Palestine refugees. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent observer of the Observer State of Palestine for his statement. The Presidency of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel.
Esteemed Council members, I hereby inform the United Nations and the Security Council that the legislation concerning UNRWA's activities in Israel will officially come into force in 48 hours, on January 30. In accordance with applicable Israeli law and following the termination of this provisional agreement, UNRWA must cease its operations and evacuate all premises it operates in Jerusalem, including the properties located in Ma'alot Dafna and Kfar Akeb. The legislation forbids UNRWA from operating within the sovereign territory of the State of Israel and forbids any contact between Israeli officials and UNRWA. Furthermore, UNRWA will be prohibited from maintaining any representative office, service, or activity within our territory. Israel will terminate all collaboration, communication, and contact with UNRWA or anyone acting on its behalf. Colleagues, this decision reflects years of efforts to address the grave accusations raised against UNRWA. This decision also reflects the reality of the situation, that UNRWA, has miserably failed in its mandate, and it has failed the people who were supposed to benefit from its services. This decision was not made lightly, nor was it made quickly. It was not a political decision, it was simply a necessary one. It follows decades of betrayal by an agency that has placed political agendas, neglect, and cover-ups over humanitarian principles. More precisely, this decision was driven by UNRWA's constant refusal to address the widespread infiltration of its ranks by Hamas and other terrorist organizations. It is intolerable for any sovereign state to facilitate the operations of an agency that threatens its national security and blatantly violates its laws. Israel remains committed to its obligations under international law, and we reaffirm our readiness to cooperate with other UN agencies that are untainted by terror and committed to neutrality and accountability. Colleagues, it is time for you to accept, as we have, that UNRWA has failed. It has failed every aspect of its mandate and responsibilities, both morally and professionally. It is now undeniable that UNRWA has been irredeemably infiltrated by Hamas. Over the past several months, I have provided dozens of examples, some stretching back decades, of UNRWA's complicity and its employees' participation in terror. Allow me to remind you of just a few. UNRWA is supposed to play a critical role in the education of Palestinians. It has certainly played a role, but only a toxic one. In both 2017 and 2021, Israel discovered Hamas terror tunnels running directly under 2 UNRWA schools in Gaza. As of 2023, when we entered Gaza, we found out that those tunnels remained operational, despite the letters and the request years prior to that. The principals of these schools, Khaled Said el-Masri and Muhammad Sawida, were confirmed Hamas operatives. Again, this is far from an isolated example. Just last year, Israel provided over 100 names of UNRWA employees who were verified members of Hamas. Unfortunately and predictably, these claims were dismissed without proper investigation. Perhaps most shockingly, on October 7, an UNRWA employee kidnapped Yonatan Samerano, an Israeli civilian. This terrorist returned home to a paycheck signed by you, Mr. Lazzarini. You signed his paycheck. He got paid until we took care of him. And all those countries who supported UNRWA paid this terrorist for years. UNRWA has also misused its platform to indoctrinate hatred. Its curriculum has glorified violence, vilified Israel, and poisoned generations of Palestinian children against any hope of coexistence. These actions are not consistent with an agency claiming to serve humanitarian purposes. They are actions of an organization complicit in preserving cycles of violence. Let's speak about the results professionally. UNRWA has failed to deliver on its core mission. After more than 75 years and tens of billions of dollars, there is so little to show for its work. Where is the Palestinian education system? Before we entered Gaza, where is the economic infrastructure to support self-reliance? Before we entered Gaza, where are the initiatives for refugee resettlement? The answer is clear. They do not exist, because UNRWA has never worked towards these goals. Instead, the agency has focused on its own survival, keeping Palestinians as forever refugees to justify its existence. This focus has all come at the expense of real progress. We heard some reports. I have to tell you that UNRWA's data is far from accurate. And I will share with you the facts. We have the number. In December 2024, of the 5,065 aid trucks that entered Gaza, UNRWA supplied just 33, 0.6%. For food aid, the numbers are similarly insignificant. Of the 3,894 food trucks that entered in that same month, UNRWA provided just 29. That's 1%. Overall, UNRWA has provided just 10% of the aid over the course of the war. In critical sectors like fuel and logistics, UNRWA's role has been sidelined by the World Food Programme and UNRWA. These numbers expose the agency's irrelevance in addressing humanitarian needs. It is not a humanitarian lifeline. It is an administrative relic that has failed to adapt to the challenges it is supposed to solve or deliver meaningful results. Esteemed colleagues, we must acknowledge that UNRWA is a vehicle, not the destination. You are not here to serve UNRWA or the employees of UNRWA. Yet, this Council and the General Assembly have held countless sessions fixated on protecting this broken vehicle, losing sight of the real priority, the people it is meant to serve, the services, the education, the health clinics. It is time to abandon the illusion that propping up a corrupt and compromised agency achieves anything meaningful. Funds and efforts must no longer sustain an organization plagued by dysfunction and infiltrated by terror. The focus must shift to supporting other organizations that are untainted, accountable, and genuinely committed to productive development. Israel is more than ready and willing to work with agencies with proven track records of efficiency and accountability. Agencies have already begun to fill the void left by UNRWA's failures, and with increased support, they can do even more. The international community must make these efforts a priority rather than turning a blind eye to corruption and collaboration with terrorism. The defenders of UNRWA often argue that its termination would create a humanitarian crisis. This is a falsehood. UNRWA's contribution to aid is easily replaceable by capable organizations that are already operational in Gaza. Every dollar spent on UNRWA is a dollar diverted from real solutions. It is time to invest in hope, not in failure. Commissioner Lazzarini himself admitted less than a year ago that UNRWA's activities could be taken on by other agencies. In other words, that UNRWA is essentially replaceable. Colleagues, not only is UNRWA replaceable, but the time to replace it is now. Let me conclude with this. In 48 hours' time, as this legislation comes into effect, we will stand at a turning point. The closure of UNRWA's operations in Israel marks the beginning of a new chapter, one focused on dignity, security, and progress. It is a moment to move beyond the failures of the past and to forge a path toward a better future for all. The international community faces a choice: to continue funding an agency that sows hatred, or to promote a system that nurtures coexistence, to enable terror, or to stand with Israel in its pursuit to accountability and justice. Israel made this decision to protect its citizens and to end the exploitation of international humanitarian aid. But even for those in this room, and I can think about few of you, who do not really care about our security, about our future, but you say that you care about the Palestinian people, it is time to drop your agendas and bias, take a constructive approach for the Palestinian people, and join us in supporting organizations that will actually help those you claim to defend.
The Presidency of the Security Council thanks the representative of Israel for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Egypt.
خالص الشكر سيد رئيس مجلس الأمن. أرحب بداية بالسيد فيليب لازاريني المفوض العام لوكالة الأونروا، والسيد ديان إيجلاند سكرتير عام مجلس النرويجي للاجئين. وأنا أشكركم مجددا سيد الرئيس على عقد اجتماع اليوم لبحث سبل حماية الأونروا من مخاطر تشريعات الكنيست والإجراءات الإسرائيلية الهادفة لتقويض أنشطتها وإلغاء حصانة موظفيها ومنشآتها في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية. ويشرفني إلقاء بيان المجموعة العربية. أولاً، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على الدور المحوري غير القابل للاستبدال للأونروا في تقديم الخدمات للاجئين الفلسطينيين في كافة مناطق العمليات على النحو الوارد في تفويضها وفق قرار الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة رقم 302 لعام 1949 والقرارات اللاحقة، وذلك على ضوء الخبرات المتراكمة للوكالة وما تقدمه من مساعدة مصممة خصيصاً للاجئين الفلسطينيين وقدرتها الفريدة على الوصول إليهم، وهو ما سبق وأن أكد عليه مراراً سكرتير عام الأمم المتحدة وكل القرارات الأممية. ثانياً، نشيد بالدور التاريخي للأونروا إبان العدوان الإسرائيلي الغاشم على قطاع غزة، ونشيد بتضحياتها التي كلفتها أكثر من 270 موظفاً. فالأونروا كانت شريان الحياة الأساسي والوحيد تقريباً لغزة، ولولا الأونروا لما أمكن إنقاذ سكان قطاع غزة. وفي هذا السياق نطالب بتنفيذ اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار بكافة مراحله ونفاذ المساعدات الإنسانية دون عوائق وحماية كل موظفي الأونروا والعاملين في المجال الإنساني. ثالثاً، تدين المجموعة العربية الهجمة الإسرائيلية على الأونروا الهادفة لأمرين: الأول هو استهداف قضية اللاجئين الفلسطينيين وحقهم في العودة والتعويض وفق القرار 194 للجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة ومحددات عملية السلام، والتي تمثلها جميعاً الأونروا ككيان مؤسسي ووظيفة. والهدف الثاني هو وقف خدمات وكالة الأونروا خاصة الخدمات التعليمية والصحية والإغاثية لزيادة معاناة الشعب الفلسطيني وإفقاره وتضييق سبل العيش عليه كخطوة أولى لتهجيره. رابعاً، تشدد المجموعة العربية على أن تشريعات الكنيست وخطاب المندوب الدائم لإسرائيل المطالب بغلق مقرات الأونروا في القدس تعد مخالفة صريحة لالتزامات إسرائيل وفق ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، وقراري الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة 181 و 273 بشأن خطة التقسيم وعضوية إسرائيل بالأمم المتحدة، وقرارات الجمعية العامة اللاحقة الخاصة بالأونروا واللاجئين الفلسطينيين، خاصة القرار 194 واتفاقية امتيازات وحصانات الأمم المتحدة لعام 1946، بل والقانون الدولي الإنساني أيضا. خامسا، تؤكد المجموعة العربية على ما سبق وأن ذكروا سكرتير عام للأمم المتحدة بأنه لا يجوز لإسرائيل التزرع بقوانينها الداخلية لتبرير عدم تنفيذ تلك الالتزامات، مع ضرورة تحمل إسرائيل كافة مسؤولياتها كقوة احتلال. وتطالب المجموعة العربية الأمم المتحدة والمجتمع الدولي بإلزام إسرائيل بكافة السبل السياسية والقانونية والقضائية بعدم إنفاذ تلك التشريعات كي تستمر الأونروا في العمل في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية دون قيود. سادسا، تشير المجموعة العربية إلى أن دفع إسرائيل بعدم حياد وكالة الأونروا لا يمكن قبوله منطقيا أو قانونيا، فالأونروا وقبل 7 أكتوبر شاركت إسرائيل بيانات موظفيها دون اعتراض من الأخيرة، كما اتخذت وكالة الأونروا كافة الإجراءات للتحقيق في الادعاءات التي لم تثبت حتى الآن. ونشير إلى أن تقرير كولونا خلص إلى اتباع الأونروا فيما يتعلق بالحياد نهجا أكثر تطورا مقارنة بغيره من كيانات الأمم المتحدة. ونرحب في هذا السياق بتنفيذ الأونروا توصيات تقرير كولونا، ونطالب بتخصيص الموارد اللازمة لهذا التنفيذ مجددا. سيد الرئيس، سادة أعضاء مجلس الأمن، لا يمكن لمزاعم إسرائيل أن تشكل أساسا لقرار فردي بمنع وكالة أممية من العمل بالمخالفة للقرارات الأممية. سابعا، تطالب المجموعة العربية حال ما كنا نتحدث حقا عن المساءلة بمساءلة إسرائيل عن قتلها المئات من موظفي وكالة الأونروا، ونحذر من سابقة قيام دولة عضو بالأمم المتحدة بالاعتداء على المنظمة الأممية وقتل موظفيها وتدمير مبانيها ومنعها من العمل. ستكون تلك بداية النهاية للأمم المتحدة والعمل متعدد الأطراف كما نعرفه جميعا. ثامنا، تطالب المجموعة العربية المجتمع الدولي بتوفير الدعم السياسي والقانوني والمالي اللازم لاستمرار أونروا في أداء مهامها وخدماتها لنحو 6 ملايين لاجئ فلسطيني في مناطق العمليات الخمس. وتشدد المجموعة العربية على أن المساهمات المالية في ميزانية الأونروا ليست منحة بل التزام بقضية اللاجئين الفلسطينيين، وتؤكد على ضرورة إيجاد حل جذري لقضية التمويل. وتشدد المجموعة العربية على أن استمرار دعم الأونروا لا يخدم فقط اللاجئين الفلسطينيين بل يساعد الدولة المضيفة على تحمل الأعباء ويضمن ويحقق الاستقرار والسلام في الشرق الأوسط. تاسعا، سيد الرئيس، في الختام، تؤكد المجموعة العربية بأسرها مجتمعين ومنفردين تمسك المجموعة بثوابت الموقف العربي ودعمها لصمود الشعب الفلسطيني الأبي الشقيق على أرضه وفي وطنه، وتشدد على رفضها التام لأي مساس بحقوقه غير القابلة للتصرف، سواء من خلال الاستيطان أو ضم الأراضي أو إخلاء أراضي فلسطين، من خلال التهجير أو تشجيع نقل أو اقتلاع الفلسطينيين من أرضهم سواء بشكل مؤقت أو طويل الأجل. وتطالب المجموعة العربية المجتمع الدولي بإيجاد حل عادل لقضية اللاجئين الفلسطينيين يضمن حق العودة وفق قرارات الشرعية الدولية، ومنها قرار الجمعية العامة للأمم المتحدة 194، وأيضا تنفيذ حل الدولتين بإنشاء الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة مترابطة الأراضي على حدود 4 يونيو 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية. كل الشكر سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Egypt for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Jordan, the last speaker this morning.
السيد الرئيس، بداية أعرب عن خالص التقدير والامتنان للجزائر الشقيقة على جهودها المميزة في الرئاسة خلال هذا الشهر الجاري، وعلى تنظيمها لهذه الجلسة الهامة. وأتوجه بالشكر إلى المفوض العام لوكالة الأنروا على إحاطته القيمة التي قدمها للمجلس، والتي تسلط الضوء على الوضع الحرج الذي تواجهه الوكالة في ظل التحديات التي تفرضها إسرائيل. وأشكر أيضا السيد يان إيغلاند الأمين العام للمجلس النرويجي للاجئين على إحاطته. كما أعرب عن خالص التقدير والاحترام لطواقم الأنروا على جهودها الجبارة وتضحياتها العظيمة في أداء مهامها الإنسانية النبيلة في ظل الحرب الإسرائيلية على قطاع غزة. فمنذ بداية الحرب قبل أكثر من عام فقدت الأنروا 272 من كوادرها، وهو العدد الأكبر للضحايا من أي منظمة أممية في أي حرب شهدها التاريخ المعاصر، ما يعكس حجم التحديات التي تواجهها الوكالة في ظل هذه الانتهاكات الجسيمة. السيد الرئيس، أعضاء المجلس الموقرين، في الوقت الذي يعقد فيه المجلس اليوم جلسته هذه سيبدأ نفاذ التشريعات الإسرائيلية ضد الوكالة، والتي تهدف إلى حظر أنشطتها ورفع الحصانة عنها وعن موظفيها ومنشآتها في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة بما فيها القدس الشرقية. هذه التشريعات كما هي الإجراءات الأخرى التي اتخذتها وتتخذها إسرائيل لتقييد عمل الوكالة وقدرتها في تنفيذ ولايتها تمثل انتهاكات جسيمة لالتزامات إسرائيل كقوة قائمة بالاحتلال بموجب القانون الدولي الإنساني، ولحرمة الوكالة ومنشآتها وحرمة موظفيها وحصاناتهم وفقا لاتفاقية امتيازات وحصانات الأمم المتحدة لعام 1946، وبالتأكيد انتهاكا لقرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة بما فيها القرار 478 للعام 1980، والذي اعتبر إجراءات إسرائيل في القدس الشرقية المحتلة لممارسة السيادة عليها وتغيير وضعها القانوني كأرض محتلة بأنها إجراءات باطلة ولاغية. ونشدد على حقوق اللاجئين الفلسطينيين في العودة والتعويض بموجب القرارات الأممية، ونؤكد أنه لا بديل عن الأنروا ولا غنى عنها في تقديم الخدمات الأساسية التي تمثل شريان حياة لما يقارب عن 6 ملايين لاجئ فلسطيني في الضفة الغربية والقدس المحتلة وقطاع غزة والأردن وسوريا ولبنان. ونؤكد على الضرورة الملحة لدعم مجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي للوكالة لتمكينها من تنفيذ ولايتها الأممية بشكل كامل، فالوكالة تبقى الجهة الوحيدة القادرة على الاطلاع بدورها الحيوي في تقديم الخدمات الأساسية التي لا غنى عنها للاجئين وفي مساندة أهالي غزة في مواجهة الكارثة الإنسانية المتفاقمة التي يواجهونها. وقد أكدت مختلف المنظمات الإنسانية ووكالات الأمم المتحدة مراراً على الدور الحيوي الذي تطلع به الوكالة، وأنه لا توجد أي جهة تمتلك القدرة أو الجاهزية لتقديم المساعدات المنقذة للحياة والخدمات الاجتماعية بالحجم والنطاق الذي تقدمه الأنروا. فشبكة الأنروا تتفوق بشكل كبير على جميع الوكالات الإنسانية الأخرى مجتمعة في الأرض الفلسطينية المحتلة، إذ تضم عدداً أكبر من المدارس والمرافق الطبية والمستودعات والمكاتب والكوادر، ويعد هذا الدور حاسما ولا غنى عنه، خاصة في العمليات الإنسانية في غزة التي تشكل جزءا محوريا من تنفيذ اتفاق وقف إطلاق النار. سيد الرئيس، إن تقويض عمل الأنروا سيعرض استقرار المنطقة للخطر ويفاقم المعاناة في غزة، حيث يعتمد أكثر من 2 مليون فلسطيني على خدمات الوكالة لمواجهة الجوع وتلبية احتياجاتهم الأساسية. ولذلك ندعو مجلس الأمن إلى تحمل مسؤولياته وحماية الأمم المتحدة ووكالاتها وأجهزتها، ونؤكد على ضرورة احترام القانون الدولي وميثاق المنظمة فيما يتعلق بعمل الوكالات والمنظمات الأممية، معتبرين أن القرارات الإسرائيلية أزاء الأنروا قرارات لا شرعية وتقوض القانون الدولي. إن السماح لأي دولة بتقويض حرمة وحصانات الوكالات الأممية يمثل سابقة خطيرة وستكون عواقبها وخيمة، حيث سيشجع ذلك على ارتكابات انتهاكات مستقبلية في مناطق نزاعات أخرى في العالم. لذا نطالب إسرائيل بوقف انتهاكاتها بحق الوكالة وعدم إعاقة المساعدات الإنسانية في غزة، كما نحث مجلس الأمن على اتخاذ إجراءات فورية وفعالة لوقف هذه الممارسات بحق الوكالة وضمان استمرارها في أداء عملها دون أي عوائق. إن الأنروا ليست مجرد وكالة إغاثة، بل ضمانة أساسية للسلم والاستقرار في المنطقة ولتحقيق حل سلمي للنزاع يضمن إقامة الدولة الفلسطينية المستقلة وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية على أساس خطوط 4 حزيران لعام 1967 ويوفر الأمن والاستقرار لإسرائيل. شكرا سيد الرئيس.
I thank the representative of Jordan for the statement. Dear colleagues, there are still a number of speakers remaining on my list for this meeting. I intend, with the concurrence of members of the Council, to suspend the meeting until this afternoon at 3 p.m. The meeting is suspended.